Welcome to my channel, everyone. You might not want to believe what just happened at the Indian Wells Tennis Garden tonight. Jannik Sinner is back, guys. Yes, he's back. He walked onto Stadium 1 carrying the weight of 2 tournament exits, doubters who think Alcaraz is leaving him behind, and 12 months of questions about whether the player the world fell in love with had somehow vanished between Doha and California. It was breathtaking. 64 minutes. That's all it took to give an answer he could have provided. The tennis world is still trying to process what really happened. Here is the full story. We will talk about the match, the reactions, and what it all means for the rest of Indian Wells. To understand what tonight meant, you need to understand what the last 3 months have actually looked like from the inside of Jannik Sinner's 2026 season. Because the narrative of a player in crisis, one who is said to have lost his edge and somehow diminished by the events of the last year, has been running on social media and in certain corners of the tennis media since January, and it has been getting louder with each passing week. The Australian Open semi-final loss to Djokovic was where the talks really began. Sinner arrived in Melbourne as the two-time defending champion. He arrived as the player who had closed out the 2025 season with a level of sustained excellence that had pushed him level with Alcaraz in the rankings conversation and produced what he described as one of the best years of his career. He was expected, by most of the tennis world, to reach the final. Instead, he ran into a 38-year-old Djokovic who played what he himself called one of the best matches of his career. And Sinner lost in 5 sets to a man who had barely competed since the previous July. The loss was neither a collapse nor an implosion. On the contrary, it was a 5-set semi-final against a player who, on that particular afternoon, played some of the best tennis seen at a Grand Slam in years. But the result went down as a loss, and the doubt began. Then came Doha. Sinner lost to Jakub Mensik in the quarterfinals. Mensik, the 12th seed, the Czech prodigy who won the Miami Open last year, and who is one of the more dangerous floaters on the current tour when his serve and his flat ball striking are synchronized. The loss was not as straightforward to explain as the Djokovic semifinal. It required a closer look at what Sinner's game has been going through in this stretch of the season. A transitional period that the people around him have been candid about acknowledging. He is trying to add new dimensions to his game. He has been deliberately stepping outside the tactical comfort zone that produced 2 Grand Slams and the world #1 ranking, to build something that can sustain him across the next decade at the top of the sport. That investment has a cost in the short term. Results in Doha and Melbourne reflected that cost with uncomfortable clarity. Carlos Alcaraz won both tournaments. He won the Australian Open. He won Doha. He extended his 2026 record to 12-0 and arrived at Indian Wells as the 2-time defending champion, chasing Djokovic's all-time Open-era winning streak record. The gap in results between the world #1 and the world #2 over the first 6 weeks of 2026 was the most visible it had been since Sinner reached the top of the rankings in 2024. The haters circled. The takes proliferated. The discourse, never subtle when it comes to players operating at the top of the men's game, suggested that Sinner was struggling in ways that went beyond the normal variation of a tennis season. That the Mensik loss revealed something structural. That the Djokovic semifinal exposed something physical. That the 2026 version of Sinner was, for reasons various commentators proposed with varying degrees of confidence, not the same player who had won back-to-back U.S. Opens and the 2025 Roland Garros. Some pointed to his ranking, which had slipped below Alcaraz in the new year with no title to show from the first 6 weeks of the season. Some pointed to the Mensik loss specifically, framing it as evidence of a vulnerability that was new. Some pointed to the fact that Alcaraz was 12-0 and Sinner was 0-2 in finals reached, as though those numbers told a complete story about the health of either player's career. What was being missed in all of that? is something the people closest to Sinner's development have been saying since January, without getting the amplification it deserved. Sinner is not struggling. He is changing. There is a specific and deliberate evolution happening in his game. An intentional process of adding tools to an already formidable arsenal that requires him to step outside what works reliably in the short term in order to build what will work even better in the medium and long term. That process has a cost. The cost is matches in the transitional stages where the new elements are not yet reliable, and the decision to use them creates errors that the previous version of the game would not have produced. That is not a crisis. That is the price of an investment that every player who has ever made a substantial development leap has had to pay at some point in their career. He accepted it in Melbourne, and he accepted it in Doha, and he arrived in Indian Wells with the specific determination of a player who knows exactly what he is doing and why. The tennis world had worked itself into a considerable state about Jannik Sinner, and then he arrived in Indian Wells and did something about it. Before a ball was struck in his opening match tonight, the reactions in the tennis world were already divided along lines that reflected how deeply the doubt had penetrated the broader conversation. On Tennis Channel Live, former player and current analyst Chris Eubanks was asked directly how concerned he was about Sinner's form coming into Indian Wells. His answer was immediate and unambiguous. Very minimal, he said. He pushed back on the narrative with the specific clarity of someone who has competed at the professional level and understands the difference between a structural decline and a normal fluctuation in form. He pointed out that Mensik, who beat Sinner in Doha, is a Masters 1000 champion in his own right, one of the biggest servers on the tour, and a player capable of beating anyone in the right conditions. He described what he expected at Indian Wells as a sharper and more focused Jannik Sinner. "You can't be that good of a player and just forget how to play tennis," said Coco Vandeweghe on the same Tennis Channel segment. She acknowledged that even the best players have their ups and downs across a career. But she reserved her most pointed observation for what Sinner had done in the immediate aftermath of the Doha loss. The decision that she said told her more about his state of mind than any match result could. After losing to Mensik, Sinner called his coach Darren Cahill immediately and said they were going to Indian Wells early. Not next week, not after a few days off, right away. He arrived a full week before his scheduled match and spent the entire week training in the California desert, adapting to the conditions, working on the elements of his game he wanted sharper, logging double sessions in the heat and the evening cool that Indian Wells produces in equal measure. Vandeweghe said she loved that. The decision to arrive early and work rather than arrive late and cope is the decision of a player who is not in crisis, but who is in the specific demanding process of building something new while maintaining the level required to compete at the top of the world. Sinner has been transparent about this process. In his pre-tourney press conference in the desert earlier this week, he said he was trying to be more aggressive from the baseline. He described the training week as very tough, many hours on court, many hours in the gym, not many days off at all. He said he was happy with how he felt on the court. And then he walked into Stadium 1 on Friday night and showed everyone watching exactly what that week of work had produced. The match against Dalibor Svrcina was the kind of performance that rewrites narratives in real time. Svrcina, ranked 109th in the world, had earned his place in the main draw through qualifying. He is 23 years old. He beat James Duckworth in straight sets in the first round. He arrived in the second round for the first time in his Indian Wells career with nothing to lose, and the specific freedom that comes from facing the world number 2 as someone nobody expects to win. He is not a soft touch. He is a professional tennis player who had beaten people to be in that stadium on Friday night. He is also, as Svrcina himself has been willing to share in interviews, someone who knew exactly who he was facing. He grew up watching Sinner and Alcaraz develop through the junior ranks. He shared practice courts with them before either of them was a name outside the junior circuit. He described Sinner, in those years, as someone you could see the potential in, but who was still young and skinny. Someone you would not immediately point to as the player who would win 4 Grand Slams before the age of 25. He said it was amazing to see the progress both Sinner and Alcaraz have made. That observation carries a specific weight because it comes from proximity, not from commentary. He has seen the arc from the beginning. The 6-1, 6-1 scoreline is what the end point of that arc looks like from the other side of the net. What unfolded over 64 minutes was not a contest. It was a demonstration. Sinner broke Svrcina's serve in the 4th game of the first set and did not look back. He won 5 consecutive games from that point, taking the first set 6-1 in 26 minutes, while conceding exactly 4 points on serve during that stretch. 4 points on serve in the entire first set. The scoreline is not a reflection of a tight match that went one way. It is a reflection of what a fully locked-in Jannik Sinner does to a player who cannot handle the combination of depth, pace, and placement that his game produces when the settings are all correctly aligned. The second set followed precisely the same pattern. Sinner dictated from the baseline, using his natural tendency to take the ball deep and early to keep Svrcina permanently on the defensive. 2 additional breaks pushed the score to 4-0. The Italian extended his run of consecutive games to 9. Svrcina eventually held serve to prevent a complete bagel, showing the pride of a professional who refused to go away entirely. It did not change the outcome. Sinner closed the match at 6-1, 6-1, 1 hour and 5 minutes of clinical, rhythmic, utterly authoritative tennis. The statistics from the match illuminate what the scoreline summarizes. Sinner won more than 75% of points behind his serve. He finished with 25 winners compared to 8 from Svrcina. He converted 5 breaks of serve across the match. He moved to the net 15 times and won the point on 12 of those occasions. He was surgical in every department. Not explosive in the way that Alcaraz is explosive, not producing the kind of crowd-delighting improvisations that make Alcaraz's performances feel like theater, but producing something in some ways more unsettling to face, the grinding, relentless, perfectly calibrated pressure of a player who takes the ball where he wants it, keeps it there, and closes out points without wasted effort or unnecessary risk. The Sinner game at its peak does not give the opponent a foothold. Tonight, it gave Svrcina nothing at all. The reactions to the performance arrived quickly, and they reflected the scale of what the tennis world had been expecting. The BNP Paribas Open's own platform described the display as jaw-dropping, noting that the crowd at Stadium 1 remained charged with enthusiasm throughout a match that offered virtually no competitive tension and a great deal of elite tennis to appreciate. The framing of the official tournament description is worth noting because it acknowledges something important. Sinner did not just win comfortably. He won in a way that reminded the people watching what his game looks like when it is fully operational. There is a specific quality to a Sinner performance at maximum output that goes beyond the numbers. The weight of ball, the consistency of the contact, the position on the court from which he is able to apply pressure at both ends and move forward to finish. The economy of motion that produces his results without the theatrical flourishes that other players require to generate the same outcomes. When all of that is running at once, as it was running tonight, it looks inevitable. It looks like a player who has not forgotten how to play tennis. It looks, in fact, exactly like what Coco Vandeweghe said it would look like. Svrcina himself, speaking after the match, offered the perspective of someone who has followed both Sinner and Alcaraz through the junior ranks and into the professional circuit. and who therefore has a specific historical position from which to view what they have become. He said that when both players were younger, you could see the potential, but Sinner was still young and skinny, someone you would not immediately identify as destined for the summit of the sport. He said it was amazing to see the progress of both players. That observation, from a peer who shared the junior circuit with them and now faces them on the professional tour, carries the specific weight of proximity. He is not describing a statistic. He is describing something he has watched happen in real time across several years. And the 6-1-6-1 scoreline is the endpoint of that development arc on this particular Friday night in the California desert. The match result also advances the narrative that everyone watching Indian Wells has been building since the draw was released on Monday. Sinner next faces either Tomas Martin Echeverry or Denis Shapovalov in the third round. Shapovalov beat Echeverry in 3 sets in a match that required a final set tiebreak. And the Canadians' performance tonight, which featured 43 winners and an aggressive net game that produced 15 conversions from 22 approaches, suggests the third round will present a more demanding test than the second round provided. Sinner and Shapovalov are level at 1 win each in their head-to-head. Their 2021 Australian Open 5-set match is the kind of reference point both players carry into any future encounter, and the Canadian, in full flow, is capable of producing the kind of aggressive, unpredictable tennis that disrupts Sinner's baseline rhythm in ways that more straightforward opponents do not. Beyond the third round, the projected path runs through Karen Khachanov, or potentially the emerging João Fonseca in the fourth round, and then into a quarter-final against Ben Shelton, a player Sinner leads 9-1, but who represents one of the most specific physical and tactical problems on the current tour. Shelton is left-handed, immensely powerful, and the Indian Wells conditions, where the serve jumps and the ball travels fast on cool evenings, suit his game particularly well. Their quarter-final, if it arrives as projected, will be the most genuinely contested match Sinner faces before a projected semi-final against Alexander Zverev. There is also the specific context of what winning Indian Wells would mean beyond the ranking points and the prize money. Sinner has won 5 of the 6 hard-court Masters 1000 events on the calendar. The one he has never won is Indian Wells. He lost to Alcaraz in the semi-finals here in both 2023 and 2024. He was absent last year due to his suspension. This tournament represents the one title that would complete the set across the entire hard-court Masters 1000 calendar, a specific kind of achievement that the people closest to his career have acknowledged as a target. Winning it would require beating 6 opponents across 2 weeks on a court where his best result is still a semifinal. But the player who produced tonight's 64-minute display is a player capable of going the distance in this draw without a credible argument to the contrary. All of that is ahead. Tonight was the beginning. And what tonight confirmed is that the beginning looks nothing like the crisis narrative the last 2 months of discourse had constructed. The player who arrived a week early worked double sessions in the California heat and the cool desert evenings, adapted to the conditions with the specific intentionality of someone who knows exactly why he is there, and walked onto Stadium 1 to face a qualifier ranked 109th in the world, is not a player who has forgotten how to play tennis. He is a player who has been building something deliberately, and who tonight showed everyone watching what the building produces when the conditions are right and the stage is large enough to matter. The 33-0 first-round record since the summer of 2023 sits underneath the result like a structural fact that no amount of social media noise can displace. 33 first-round matches, 0 losses, across every surface and every tournament level, in the period that has included everything the critics have spent the last 2 months citing as evidence of decline. That record does not describe a player who has lost his edge. It describes a player who, in the specific context of first-round matches, has not lost a set of his composure in over 2 years. The haters, or let's say the critics, were loud for 6 weeks. Stadium 1 at Indian Wells on a Friday night answered them in 64 minutes. There is one more thing we need to say before leaving. It is about tonight beyond the match itself. Sinner said on court that he is very happy to be back here because he did not play here last year, and that the passion the Indian Wells crowd brings is amazing. He said it with the specific warmth of a player returning to a tournament he missed entirely due to circumstances that were painful and complicated, and that the Indian Wells crowd, to their considerable credit, has clearly decided to leave behind. His reception tonight was generous and loud, and consistent with the tone of a stadium that was glad to have him back, and prepared to say so without qualification. That reception matters. Tennis crowds at the biggest events can be fickle, and they can be cruel, and they can remind a player of things he would prefer to process privately. The Indian Wells crowd on Friday night did none of that. They gave Sinner what every player wants and few always get. He accepted it, played 64 minutes of tennis that justified every moment of their attention, and walked off Stadium 1 looking like exactly what he is, the world number 2. 4 Grand Slams at 24, 8 and 2 on the season, with the most important tournament on the hard-court calendar ahead of him. Not in crisis, not forgotten, not diminished, and somewhere in the Indian Wells Tennis Garden on Friday night, the 33-match first-round winning streak ticked over to 34. Nobody who watched the match will remember it as one of the great contests of the season, but everyone who watched it will remember the feeling it produced. The feeling of a player who had been written off too quickly, dismissed too soon, reduced to a narrative that never quite fit the reality, stepping back onto the court that matters most to him right now, and reminding the entire tennis world what it looks like when Jannik Sinner decides it is time to remind them. And that's it for our video. It was a breathtaking game indeed, and Sinner showed why he's not the least bit inferior to Alcaraz. I want to see your own reactions on